Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. This is going to be my final wrap up of 2021. These are all the books that I read last month back in November. It's not quite my December wrap up just yet. I think most of them, or a lot of them at least, are new releases with illustrated covers. So let me just jump into everything that I read back in November. The first two books that I read were part of the same series. I read Rhodey and Moxie by C.M. Stunick. These are books 2 and 3 in the Rock Hard Beautiful series, which is a Rockstar reverse harem romance series. I read book 1 a little while ago and I had so much fun with that one, so I've been waiting for my library to finally get the rest of the series in audio. I was able to binge and finish up the rest of the series, but I sadly didn't love them quite as much as I loved book 1. I gave both Rhodey and Moxie 3 stars. They were okay, not bad, but nothing amazing either. We're back with the heroine Lilith and her 5 rock stars who are all in a band together. I was really glad to be back with this group of characters. Book 2 picks up right where book 1 left off. All 6 of them are together, they're committed, and books 2 and 3 are all about them dealing with their past trauma and their current issues. There's a lot of sexual healing that goes on in the series. These characters, Lilith and the guys, they pretty much use sex to deal with their issues, which is both fun but a little unrealistic. We do finally get a little bit more of the relationship between 2 of the guys, between Paxton and Ransom, who have a bit of a past together. Those 2 are trying to repair their broken relationship so that they can all be one happy reverse harem with Lilith. Honestly, there's not that much that goes on in these 2 sequels. They probably could have been condensed into one sequel, and they sadly just weren't as exciting as book 1 was for me. I then read Mum's the Word by Stacey Hart, which didn't work for me at all. I gave this one 2 stars. I didn't like either of the main characters. I felt zero chemistry between them. This one is the 3rd and final book in her Pride and Prejudice retelling series, the Bennett Brothers series. It's like Pride and Prejudice but gender swapped, which as a premise does sound good, but this 3rd book I just wasn't into, which does suck because I remember really liking book 1. But here we have a bit of a star-crossed lovers kind of romance. It's a forbidden romance between 2 members of rival flower shop families. It's about Marcus and Maisie, and Maisie's mom is trying to take down Marcus's family, and there's a whole boring lawsuit. These 2 have to keep their relationship a secret from their family, so it's a forbidden romance, but I just never really felt the excitement from this. They're supposed to be enemies, but I never really felt it. The romance and the characters were just bland to me, and I just had a really hard time getting invested in the story at all. My next read was much better. I read Battle Royal by Lacey Parker. I gave this one 4 stars. This is my second Lacey Parker book. I read Act Like It last year, I think, and this one ended up being another really great grumpy hero kind of romance. This book is basically if the Great British Bake Off turned into a romance book, because there's a whole baking competition. Both the main characters are bakers. Dom and Sylvie actually already met before through another competition where Dom was one of the judges, but it didn't really end well between them because Sylvie's cake accidentally explodes into Dom's face and he votes her off. They reunite now as competitors for a chance to bake for a royal wedding. It's very much rivals to lovers, Grumpy Sunshine, though it's also more like rivals to friends to lovers with some slow burn. All of which I love though. Dom is this perfectly stoic hero. He hates everyone but the heroine, so he's pretty much like the perfect kind of grump. The romance is fun, it is slow, but it's full of great banter. There is an emotional side to it too. I just really like this one. My next 2 reads are both by Nikki Sloane. They're part of the same series. This first one is 3 Hard Lessons, which is book 2 in her Blindfold Club series. It centers around this BDSM club, though each book can be read as a standalone. This book I gave 3 stars to, though honestly the whole series, it's not my favorite from Nikki Sloane. Here we have one of the sex workers at the club who falls for her newest client. He wants to pay her $30,000 just to kiss and talk, which is not at all a bad deal, right? But Dominic and Peyton do feel this connection between them as soon as they meet, and then after they try to figure out their identities, they both go to Japan together. Peyton goes with Dominic to Japan because that's where he lives and works, and it's in Japan where they try to figure out if they can actually be in a relationship, even though Peyton is the kind of heroine who is very allergic to relationships. It was hot hot, very steamy, like Nikki Sloane's books usually are, but I didn't really feel anything outside of the bedroom. Like, they went to freaking Japan, but we rarely ever got to actually see the outside of his apartment. Also, there's a third act breakup here, and usually I love those because I love the added angst, but here it was just very annoying. It wasn't done well here. I was just rolling my eyes, so overall, not really that great. I also ended up reading the next book in the Blindfold Club series, Three Little Mistakes, which I also gave 3 stars to, though it maybe could be a 3.5 because I liked it slightly more. Honestly, I probably could have enjoyed this a lot more if I didn't read book 2, because the hero in book 3, he does something in book 2 that made me really uncomfortable, and I was just never really able to let that go in his own book. This third book is about Joseph, who is the owner of the Blindfold Club. His romance is an age gap romance. The heroine is a lot younger than him, and she's also very forbidden to him because she's the daughter of one of his clients. Noemi does try to hide her identity from him, even though he already knows who she is, but she's trying to rebel from her father, trying to go out of her comfort zone, and she's trying to use Joseph to do this. She experiments with Joseph, it gets hot, but I just couldn't let go of my dislike of him to fully enjoy this one. And also, I'm just not the biggest fan of threesomes in a non-threesome romance. Like, each book in the series, I'm pretty sure, has had some sort of threesome, and I can't say I was the biggest fan. So even though this one wasn't amazing for me, it's probably my favorite of the series so far. I read my favorite book of November next. It is the final book in the Four Horsemen series. I read Death. This was a 4.5 to 5 star read for me. It was so good. A really fantastic ending to one of my favorite fantasy romance series. I'm still feeling pretty bittersweet over this because I can't believe that it's over. It was great though. I mean, it's pretty much what you expect. It follows along the same lines as the previous 3 books. We have a 4 horsemen for a hero. He is Death incarnate. He literally kills people, anyone who's around him. Death, who's also known as Thanatos, he is obsessive, he's possessive, and he's very, very sweet to the heroine. The romance gets a little complicated because it's like, how can you fall in love with this kind of guy, this kind of hero? But Thalassa really made me believe in the romance between Thanatos and Lazarus. I think the only reason though that I'm giving this 4.5 stars, like it's closer to 4.5 than 5, is because there's a whole plot with this baby that Lazarus finds that I felt like wasn't really necessary, or at least could have been fleshed out a bit more. But the romance was perfect. Lazarus is literally the only human that Death can't kill. She is immortal. Anytime she dies, she comes back to life. He really wants her for himself, and I also love that we get to see a lot of the previous horsemen. They all band together to try to stop Death from killing the rest of the world. There's action and steam. It was just a really great ending to this series, and I can't believe that it's over. Next, I read Been There Done That by Hope Ellis. This was the first time I read this author, and I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars. It was a very solid second chance romance. Nick and Zora were childhood best friends turned lovers, but then something happened with Nick that causes him to leave town all of a sudden and just never look back. So Zora was left devastated because the two of them were supposed to live the rest of their lives together, but now she just never sees him again. They reunite over 10 years later. It's a pretty long gap, but they reunite, and Zora is not happy to see him again, and she's not happy to be forced to work with him on some project. The romance is pretty much Nick trying to make up for what he did, explain why he did what he did, and Zora trying to decide whether she has it in her to trust Nick again. It's fairly slow paced, but I did love the angst. I love the emotional side to this story. There's a great cast of characters, and I mean, this is kind of a groveling romance, but not really. It's just the hero trying to earn the heroine's trust back again. It was sweet, and it worked really well for me, though I will say, if you're not a fan of miscommunication or lack of communication, this book might not be for you. I then read Witch Fleece by Anne Aguirre. I gave it some 3 stars. It was another okay read. I'm sad I didn't love it more. It honestly was pretty underwhelming, and as soon as I finished it, I just never thought about it again. There's nothing too memorable about this one, even though it's a paranormal romance with witches, but it just read really contemporary for a paranormal romance. The heroine is a witch. She comes from a family of witches. The hero is a human. He's a baker, and he's also a virgin because he's been cursed in all things love and relationships. The romance was nothing really great. Titus falls in insta-love with Danica, who is very anti-relationship. It did start off pretty cute between them at first, but then it fizzled out and I just never really got reinvested again. I never really cared too much about their characters, and the best part about this book probably was Titus's Bakery. Next I read The Royals Next Door by Karina Halley. This was a 3-star read for me, lots of 3 stars this month. It's a royal adjacent romance, which means neither of the main characters are actually royal. They just have some sort of relationship with the royal family, and in this case the hero is a bodyguard to a royal couple. That royal couple moves in right next door to the heroine, who is this regular old elementary school teacher. This pretty much changes Piper's life. She was a recluse. She always took care of her mentally ill mom. She never felt accepted in the small town that they lived in. But now, because of this royal couple next door, she finally finds some friends and she has a romance with their bodyguard. The romance was sweet, and I thought Harrison and Piper's meet cute was really great. He thinks that she is some security threat, but I never really fell in love with their characters. They were okay, but I did enjoy the discussions about mental health and mental illness in this book. Like the parts about Piper and her mom got pretty heartbreaking, and I was feeling so much for them. And then there's their whole small town thing. Like usually with small towns you get a great sense of community and love within the small town, but here Piper and her mom were just so ostracized from the rest of the community that it just was not feel good. You would think from this cover that this book would be a rom-com, and even though I should know better, it definitely was not that. I then finally caught up on the Hades and Persephone series by Scarlett St. Clair. I read book 2, A Touch of Ruin, and book 3, A Touch of Malice. I really liked book 1 when I read it, and I'm glad that the rest of the series was just as good for me. I gave both of them 4 stars like I did book 1. Book 2 pretty much picks up right where book 1 left off. Persephone is trying to figure out more about her powers, figure out her role as a goddess, and she and Hades are trying to figure out their relationship, though in the second book Persephone does get pretty immature and childish, and I can see why a lot of people got annoyed with her in this sequel, and I did too, but it was nothing that really ruined the book for me, and that might have been because I listened to this in audio and it was just really nice to listen to. I also did know how messy Persephone was going to be in A Touch of Ruin, but I would still highly recommend the audio if you can get it. Book 3, A Touch of Malice, I really enjoyed too. This one I thought was the ending of the series, but apparently it's not. We're getting a 4th book. This one, even though I did really like it, I give it 4 stars. I will acknowledge that not much happens here besides Hades and Persephone always sleeping together. There's a lot of steam here, but nothing really happens until towards the very end of the book. Still, I had a lot of fun with this. I just loved seeing how smitten Hades was with Persephone. Like, you can just feel how much he adores her. If you love Hades and Persephone retellings, I highly recommend the series. It's one of the few retellings that actually worked for me. Next, I read a novella. I read Vault by Tate James. This is the sequel to Madison Kate and the Hades series. I mean, even though it follows Madison Kate and her guys, it does have some spoilers for Hades, so it's definitely recommended to read both of the series before reading this one. I had a lot of fun with this one. I gave it 4 stars. It was really great to be back with Madison Kate and her 3 guys. It takes place during the Hades series when they're bodyguarding Hades' sister. It's great, but I just wouldn't expect too much outside of them being in the bedroom. I really liked it, and I'm still hoping that we get a reverse harem romance for Hades' sister. My next read was a bit of a disappointment because of how high my expectations for it were. I read Her Soul for Revenge by Harley laroux, which is the sequel to Her Soul to Take. I love the first book, but the second book was definitely not as good. For one thing, it's pretty much a retelling of book 1, but from a different couple's perspective, so I already knew what was going to happen. I also didn't really feel the romance between Juniper and Zane, mainly because it didn't feel like Juniper cared that much about Zane. She was just going on her quest for revenge against this evil god and its cults that tried to kill her. I really wanted to love this one more, but I got so annoyed at how often Juniper would just jump right into danger. I don't know why she always thought she could go up against these giant, powerful creatures with just a gun. She would always just end up getting hurt, getting herself hurt, and getting Zane hurt. So I gave this one 3 stars. It was quite the disappointment, but I will say the best part about this book were the teases of the next couple, the 3rd and final couple. I am so excited for their book, and hopefully it's a lot better than the sequel and we don't get like a rehash of what we already know. My next read was Satisfaction Guaranteed by Corellia Stetz Waters. This is an FF romance. I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was okay, cute, but I just didn't love it. It's Grumpy Sunshine, it's got opposites attract, and it's set at a sex toy store. Cade is the grumpy accountant and Selena is the sunshine artist, and they both become co-owners of this store and they do everything they can to revive it. They both try to keep their hands off each other. Selena makes this vow of celibacy. I like these two, but I didn't love them. The story itself was a little underwhelming, even with the whole sex toy store. There's just a little bit too much self-doubt from the main characters for me to fully have fun with this one. But I will say, if you love Grumpy Sunshine and you want that in an FF romance, you should still try this one. Next, I read A Lot Like Adios by Alexis Daria. This is the second standalone in her Primas of Power series. I ended up liking this one a lot more than book 1. It's like 3.5 to 4 stars for me. It's not amazing, but it was a lot of fun to read. The audiobook was really enjoyable. The writing is still a little cheesy. It's almost like reading a Harlequin, but if you can get past that like I did, I think you could enjoy the rest. So this is a childhood best friends to almost lovers romance between Michelle and Gabe. They almost could have been something more than just friends, but then Gabe, when he turned 18, he decided to up and leave town. He left the city, he left his family, and he left Michelle. Now they reunite many years later and they're forced to work together on some marketing project. Michelle is both angry and happy to see Gabe again. He was her best friend, but then he also ghosted her. They end up finally getting into a relationship, but they do have to keep it a secret from their families. I will say I wasn't a big fan of the secrecy. I didn't really understand it. Like, I didn't get why they had to keep it a secret. But other than that, the romance was still pretty sweet, and like book 1, I really love the family aspect here too. I read another foodie romance, another baking romance, Don't I Fall in Love by Jackie Lau, which I gave 4 stars to. It's a romance between a Canadian actor and a bakery owner heroine, and I really liked it. Ryan and Lindsay were adorable together. He asks her for help to teach him how to bake because he's going on some celebrity baking show. They do get together pretty quickly in the book. It's a very low angst, low drama kind of romance. Ryan is dealing with the loss of his mother and his messy relationship with his dad, who was a really great side character. Lindsay's dealing with life now as a regular person, dating someone famous, with the whole lack of privacy and mean comments on social media. I wouldn't really consider this a rom-com, but it's still a sweet and cozy read, and of course I loved all the foodie aspects. And also there were some great discussions about what it's like being Asian in the entertainment industry, like all the gender expectations, so it was really meaningful to read. My next read sadly did not live up to the hype. I read Neon Gods by Katie Robert. I really didn't like this one. I give it 2 stars. I struggled with it a lot. When I first read it, when I first picked up the arc, I made it about 25% before I put it down. I waited a couple weeks before I picked it back up again. I read about half of it and then I put it down again. This book took me forever to read. It was a bit of a struggle to finish. I finally just read the second half through audio, and usually things are a little bit easier to enjoy through audio, but that didn't really help me with this book either. So this is the first book in a series that's based off of Greek mythology. Each of these books are retellings. This first one is a Hades and Persephone retelling. I'm usually a sucker for this kind of retelling, but this was a total fail for me, mainly because the hero here, Hades, was just way too soft and nice. That's not really the type of Hades that I like to read about in my retellings. I like my Hades more on the darker side and more broody, but here he was just this misunderstood cinnamon roll. Honestly, if this wasn't a Hades and Persephone retelling, I probably could have enjoyed it more because then I wouldn't have any expectations for these characters, but it is a retelling and I did have expectations and nothing really lived up to them. The world building was not good here. It took me forever to figure out if this was fantasy or contemporary because it was just very confusing. The story itself was pretty meh. Persephone is forced to marry Zeus, but she doesn't want to, so she runs away. She runs away to Hades' territory and she makes this deal with him. She wants him to ruin her so that Zeus won't want her anymore, so they put on this show. They do like public BDSM stuff that I was not into because I'm just not not into this kind of erotica anymore. So sadly, nothing really worked well for me here. I don't know if I want to continue with this series, especially when like the one Greek retelling that I want to read is Hades and Persephone, and this one didn't live up to my expectations, but I guess we'll see. I then read a Christmas romance. I read Window Shopping by Tessa. This was an adorable read that is pretty much perfect to read for the holiday season. The heroine Stella has just gotten out of prison and she's trying to make this new life for herself, reinvent herself. She meets the hero in front of his department store, but she doesn't know that he owns that department store. Aiden ends up hiring Stella to be the window store decorator, and he's pretty much, you know, in love with her at first sight. He's a very on-brand type of Tessa Bailey hero. He's just completely head over heels for Stella from the very beginning. He tries to woo her, he tries to make her trust him, and that's pretty much the whole story, the whole romance. There's not too much outside of it. There probably could have been more development with that, like with Stella's parents, with her toxic friend, but I didn't really mind it. I was just here for the romance, for the Christmas vibes. It's also a reverse Grumpy Sunshine romance, so Stella's the grumpy heroine and Aiden is the sunshine hero. This was great. I give it 4 stars. If you love Grumpy Sunshine, if you love holiday romances, you definitely need to read this one. I then read a Rejected Mates romance for the first time. It's The Tyrant Alpha's Rejected Mate by Kate C. Wells. I honestly had no idea what to expect from this one. I've never read Rejected Mates before, even though I see it on Amazon all the time, but I love this one. I give it 4 stars. It was really good. It's been a hot minute since the last time I found a new groveling romance that I fell in love with, that I wanted to reread over and over, and this one is it for me. It's a paranormal werewolf romance with the rejected mates trope. So the hero, who's the alpha of his pack, he doesn't believe that the heroine is his mate, so he rejects her. And then obviously he realizes that he messed up, she really is his mate, and he has a lot of making up to do. It's a groveling romance, though I will admit Killian definitely could have groveled a little bit more, but I always say that anyway. I just loved how tortured he was over Una, the heroine. Like, she really made him work for it because he was the biggest ass in the beginning of the book. She actually is able to find someone to take the mating bond out of her so that she's not pining over him, she's not in pain over him anymore, so that was really refreshing to read. Like, reading about a heroine who doesn't pine over a hero who doesn't want her, that was great to read. But I love the angst here. There's so much good angst, so much regret on Killian's part. The whole shifter pack aspect was pretty unique too. It's a little different than your typical werewolf romance. It's like a primal kind of shifter romance, if that makes sense, but it was a little cringy to see how they treated packmates like the heroine, like Una, someone who's weaker and disabled. But I was very into this world. I am now very interested in rejected mates romances, so if anyone has more recs like this, please let me know. I know Kate C. Wells does plan to write more rejected mates shifter romances, so I'm so excited for them. Next, I read The Road to Rose Bend by Naima Simone. This is a small town romance that was very long. It's like 400 pages. I gave this one 3 stars because of the length. It just felt so long. It took me forever to finish, and the slow burn wasn't really working for me here. It's about a widowed hero and a newly divorced heroine who has just gotten pregnant by her ex-husband. She returns home to the small town that she grew up in, but she doesn't exactly have a great welcome home from her parents because they almost don't want to have anything to do with her. They still blame her for her sister's death, so it's very intense and depressing. Cole, the hero, is also living a very depressing life after the death of his wife and his unborn child. Seeing Sydney is the first time that he's ever felt something for another woman, but he's definitely not ready for anything like that. This is a very slow burn. It's friends to lovers, but the book just dragged for me. It felt so long that it was hard for me to get invested, and I'm also just not a big fan of heroes who are still hung up on another woman, whether they're alive or not. I wish I could have enjoyed this one more because I really liked the first Naima Simone romance that I read, but this one was just okay. My next read was another not so great read. I read Not Your Average Hot Guy by Gwenda Bond. This was a 2-star read. It had a lot of potential, but it just fell completely flat. The hero, Luke, is a demon. He's literally the son of Satan, and Callie, the heroine, is human. She somehow gets kidnapped by this crazy cult who ends up summoning Luke. This cult is pretty much trying to destroy the world, and Luke and Callie partner up to try to stop them. So it sounds fun, right? But it just ended up reading a really young adult to me, like really young. Luke didn't feel at all like the badass son of Satan that he could have been. I just didn't really care about either of their characters. I didn't feel the romance at all. There's just a lot of wasted potential in this book. My next read was The Donut Trap by Julie 2. This one I gave 3.5 stars. Could have been a 4, but the romance wasn't quite solid enough for me. But it is another bakery and donut related romance that I read this month. There's been a lot of them releasing this year lately, and I'm all for it. I like this one though. I didn't fully love it, but it was still enjoyable to read. It does feel more like a coming of age story than a romance. There is some romance, it just could have been fleshed out a little bit more. The donut shop here was definitely the highlight for me, and I also enjoyed reading about a heroine who is a second generation Asian American. Jasmine's parents are the ones who own the donut shop, and she's been working there, helping them out ever since she graduated college. She has no idea what she wants to do with her life, so this book is pretty much her figuring that out. There's some romance with her old college crush Alex, but her focus and the focus of this book is definitely on her family and her future. I will say it was a little obvious about what she had to do at the end of the book. It wrapped up a little too neatly, but still I did like this one. I then read a new to me author. I read Fool Me Once by Nikki. I mainly read this one because my library got the audiobook. I had never heard of this author before, but the cover looked cute, and I was just really in the mood to read a new to me indie author, so I read it and it was cute. I gave it 3 stars. It's a new to college romance. Blakely and Keegan first met a few years ago during spring break. They had an amazing time together, but when they went back home, things kind of got lost and they were never able to reach out to each other again. And surprise, surprise, Blakely ended up getting pregnant and she had no way to contact Keegan about this. They reunite now in college a few years later, and things get dramatic in a fun and lighthearted way. There's a mistaken identity with twins. Keegan is completely shocked that he's a dad now. The romance was really sweet, especially in the beginning. Keegan was all in with Blakely, which I always love to see, but then it started falling flat with them rehashing the same problems over and over. Blakely just not being able to trust Keegan. And then there's this random twist at the end of the book that came out of nowhere that I just wasn't a big fan of because it didn't feel necessary. So this one could have been better, but it wasn't like a bad book. I just didn't love it or hate it. My next read was my November book club pick for Ravished by Romance. It was The Earl Takes All by Lorraine Heath. This is a historical romance with a crazy plot. The hero, Edward, his twin brother, has just died while they were away traveling in Africa. Edward promises to fulfill his brother's dying wish, which is to take care of Albert's wife and his unborn child. And Edward decides that of all the ways to fulfill this promise, he has to pretend to be Albert in order to take care of Julia while she's pregnant. So he has to pretend to be Julia's husband, he has to pretend to be a freaking earl, and he actually succeeds. I don't know how realistic this is, but it works for him, though it is a little hard because he's actually been in love with Julia since he first met her. He's pretty much wanted her since she was engaged to his twin. I had a lot of fun with this one. I gave it 4 stars. It gets dramatic, a little bit heartbreaking, a little bit angsty. Lorraine Heath is kind of known for these crazy plots, and I'm really excited to read more of them. I then read The Brightest Star in Paris by Diana Biller. This is more like a paranormal historical romance. It's got ghosts. It's a spin-off of The Widow of Rose House, which also had a ghost story to it. This one is about another member of the Moore family who I completely adore. They are all fantastic. So this is Ben's story. He's a doctor and he has a second chance romance with a ballerina heroine. They met and fell in love many years ago back in Paris, and now he's finally back, and all he wants to do is find Amelie and try to get back into her life. And he's actually able to do this by helping her try to figure out why she's been haunted by ghosts. Like, she can literally see ghosts. There's also a bit of fake dating here because they need an excuse to be around each other a lot in public, but the romance was okay here. I didn't really love it like I loved it in The Widow of Rose House. It got a bit too overshadowed here by the whole ghost plot, which I honestly didn't care too much about. A lot of the things that I struggled with here were done really well in Diana Biller's debut, so I'm surprised that this one wasn't as good. I read The Lady Gets Lucky by Joanna Shupe. This is book 2 in her Fifth Avenue Rebel series, and it's also a foodie historical romance. Alice is a wallflower, she's an heiress, and she's secretly a chef. She's been learning from her family's hotel's chef, and it's the same chef that the hero wants to hire away for his supper club. Kit is your classic rake hero, and he's the perfect guy for Alice to ask help for because she wants to learn how to seduce a man. They make a deal with each other in exchange for seduction lessons from Kit. Alice will give Kit her chef's recipes. I gave this one 4 stars. It was such a good romance. The pining here is intense. The chemistry and banter were great, and I love the foodie twist to this historical romance. Okay, so I had to move to my desk, but I'm almost done with this wrap up. I did end up reading a new Jessa Kane novella last month. It was Bayou Bruiser. This one I gave 3 stars. It's like your classic Jessa Kane novella, smutty novella. We have a giant hero who scares people into paying their debts to his boss. He ends up saving the heroine when he goes to collect money from her father, and he finds her chained to the basement. It's absolutely ridiculous and over the top, a very classic Jessa Kane insta-love. It's pretty much what you sign up for when you read a Jessa Kane novella, so I give this one 3 stars. I also read a very anticipated book. It was The Sinful Ways of Jamie Mackenzie by Jennifer Ashley. This is the first book in the second generation of the Mackenzie family. I was especially excited about this one because it's also Ian and Beth's son. Jamie is their firstborn son, and we do get to see a lot of Ian and Beth. So this book and the second generation is set during the Edwardian era, which means there are cars now. It's pretty interesting to read about this time period because I don't really see it in historical romances. The romance itself was cute. I liked Evie and Jamie. I didn't love them quite as much as Ian and Beth, but it was still really fun and really cute. They knew each other in college, and now they're working together to try to steal this vase from a museum. So yes, there is a heist here, but I didn't fully love this book. I still gave it 4 stars because it's really good, but I didn't fully love it, mainly because I wanted more from the romance. Like, I wanted the book to focus more on the romance than everything else, because we get a lot of focus on Jamie's family, all the Mackenzies, which is nice, but at the same time I wanted more of Evie and Jamie. They kind of got lost in the middle of all the Mackenzies because there's so many of them. And also, with this being in the Edwardian era, there just aren't as many stakes as there are in earlier time periods. Like, if Jamie and Evie wanted to be together, nothing really was stopping them. Still, it was a good read. I did enjoy it, and I'm definitely looking forward to more of the second generation. My next 2 reads were also historical romances. I read these for a recent video that I put out. This one is The Bride by Julie Garwood. This is actually a reread of this book. I read it a long time ago back in college, and I wanted to reread this first book that I ever read by Julie Garwood. I gave it 4 stars back then, and it's still a 4-star read for me. It's not my favorite Julie Garwood book. It's still good, but just not a top favorite. We have a marriage of convenience between a Scottish laird hero and the daughter of a baron. Jamie and Alec are pretty much your typical Julie Garwood main characters. Jamie is sassy and feisty, not afraid to go up to the alpha hero, and Alec is very much that kind of alpha hero. He's used to getting what he wants, he's used to people doing what he wants, and Jamie doesn't do that. Honestly, the main reason I can't fully give this one 5 stars is mainly because of Alec, because he is such a troll. He's the kind of hero who loves to make the heroine mad just to get some sort of reaction out of her. So he purposely says like rude, awful things. It's nothing like too cruel, but it did get on my nerves sometimes, so I was over that pretty quickly. I didn't hate him though, just because it's Julie Garwood and she's still able to write him in a charming way. But yeah, this one is not the best Julie Garwood for me, but still pretty good. The next historical romance was A Knight in Shining Armor by Jude Devereaux. This was a 3-star read for me. I both liked it and didn't like it. I was a little disappointed by it because I've heard really good things about it. I was hoping I would love it, but things weren't perfect here. It's a time travel historical romance. It does take place at first in modern day. Nicholas, our hero, is the knight in shining armor. He shows up from the 1500s after the heroine Douglas has just been left stranded and ditched by her boyfriend. She's made out to be this really weak heroine who's desperate for love, and I see that it's part of her character development, but I can't say that I was a fan of that. So now she's kind of forced to help Nicholas try to time travel back into the past, even though she doesn't really believe that he's from the 1500s. They fall in love in present day, but I didn't really see it. I didn't see why they fell for each other because they both kind of sucked, at least in present day. They do eventually time travel back into the past, and it was this part that I enjoyed a lot more. The romance here felt a lot more genuine, and even though the writing here was a little too descriptive for me, like Jude Devereaux just went on and on about furniture, the day-to-day lives of the 1500s, the clothing, it was a lot. Other than that, I really liked the second half of this book, and the ending was so freaking good. I loved it. It was just so freaking romantic, but yeah, I loved the second half. I didn't really like the first half, so it balances out for me at 3 stars. I also read How to Marry Keanu Reeves in 90 Days by K.M. Jackson. This was a bit of a strange book. At first I thought it sounded, you know, silly and fun, so I was looking forward to it, but it wasn't the best. I give it 3 stars. It was okay. I liked some things about it, but other things made me a little uncomfortable. The heroine, Bethany, is pretty much in love with Keanu Reeves, and as soon as she hears that he's about to get married, she jumps into a car to go road trip to find him in order to stop him so he can marry her instead. In theory, this did sound cute, a little weird, but fun, but I didn't realize when I finally read it that the heroine is actually in her 40s. She's like a full-grown woman who thinks that it's a good idea to chase down a movie star in order to get him to marry her. If she was young, it probably would have been a little bit more understandable, but she is a full-grown adult, right? I just really couldn't believe that she would act this way. It's also a friends to lovers romance. She goes on the road trip with her best friend True. It's very obvious that True is in love with Bethany, but Bethany is just oblivious, or at least purposely oblivious about True's feelings and her own feelings for True. I actually really liked his character. I thought he was really sweet, but yeah, overall this one didn't really do it too well for me. I also finally read One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This is her FF romance, and I give it 3 stars. It was a bit of a struggle for me because I pretty much liked everyone except the main characters, especially the main character, August. I just didn't understand why she was so obsessed with Jane and so obsessed with trying to save her. So it's about a girl, August, who moves to New York City for school, and she goes on the subway and happens upon another girl, Jane, who she develops a crush over. But then it turns out that Jane has actually time traveled. She's actually from the 1970s, and she's stuck in the subway in like this little time loop. Honestly, the biggest problem for me here was just that the romance felt so one-sided. Like August was just so into Jane and I felt nothing from Jane for August. Jane literally just wanted to go back home, back to the 1970s, and I couldn't blame her. It took forever for them to solve this time travel mystery too. Like it's a long book, like over 400 pages, and it almost seemed like as soon as they solved it at the end, the middle 200 pages were kind of unnecessary. I like the overall cast, the writing is fine, but I just didn't really like August. So this is an okay read. I gave it 3 stars, just like I gave Red, White, and Royal Blue. And then the final book that I read back in November was Role Model by Rachel Reed. This one is part of her Game Changer series, her hockey romance series. I really like this one. It's like 3.5 to 4 stars for me. The only reason it's not like a full 4 stars is because I didn't like it quite as much as the first 2 books, which are also 4 stars for me. So we have Troy, our hockey player hero. He's recently been traded to Ottawa and he is trying to do better. He's got a lot of making up to do because he wasn't always the best person. He put up a front to hide his sexuality and he hurt people. He is trying to do better now, and he ends up falling for his new team's social media manager, Harris, who is a total sweetheart. This is a grumpy sunshine romance. Harris is a giant giant cinnamon roll. He is openly gay, whereas Troy is still publicly closeted and struggling to come out. I adored Harris's character from the start, but Troy did take a while to warm up to. I did, however, love how cute it was that Troy kept thinking about Harris in this teenage crush kind of way. It was a sweet read though, and it's been a while since the last time I read a sports romance, so this was fun. If you love hockey romances and you love MM, you definitely should check out this entire series. And that's it for my November wrap up, my final wrap up of 2021, all 34 books. It wasn't a bad reading month, not too many new favorites, but it is what it is. I hope you enjoyed this video. Links to everything will be down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching my final wrap up of 2021. I'll see you all next time in 2022. Bye!